Good morning. Thanks for joining us and welcome to today's Weltman webinar. Today's topic is New Year, New Counsel, the trials, tribulations, and expectations of becoming an attorney. I'm Chuck Pona, the firm's managing partner, and I will serve as today's moderator. I have been with Weltman for 34 years, having held multiple roles with the firm. I transitioned to my current role as managing partner in 2021, previously having led the firm's consumer collections practice area. Before we get started this morning, let's learn a bit more about our panelists. Let's start with AJ. AJ, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I am just over my first year as an attorney, so haven't been doing this for all that long. Obviously, that's why I'm on this panel. I grew up in Northeast Ohio, moved down to Columbus for undergraduate at Ohio State and then law school at Capitol, and I've been here ever since. And I like sports and things like that. I'm not sure how in-depth you want us to be, but that's kind of how I got here. And I now practice in the consumer branch, largely collecting on defaulted credit cards, student loans, things of that such.
You've got to have a favorite sport. Tell me what your favorite sport is.
Oddly enough, I think it's a different one for an attorney, but my favorite sport's mixed martial arts. Big fan of MMA.
Excellent. Cameron, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, I'm Cameron Dean. I've been at Weltman for about 10 months now, and I'm just beginning my third year of practice as an attorney. I originally grew up in Nebraska in a very small farm town that I can assure you've never heard of, but moved out to Philadelphia after high school and went to both undergrad and law school at Temple University here in Philadelphia, and then stayed in the city to continue working as an attorney. Because I've been here for about 12 years now, I'm a very avid Philadelphia Eagles football fan. I follow all four teams, but the Eagles are obviously my favorite. Still reeling and disappointed from that loss a week and a half ago, but we'll come back strong next year. I'm confident.
So Cameron, share us a little bit about Nebraska to PA. Was that a family move?
It was just me moving out, but actually my dad grew up in Philadelphia or the Philadelphia region. So he grew up out here, didn't like being in the city, didn't like the East Coast, decided to move out to the middle of nowhere. I didn't like living in the middle of nowhere, so just like him, I decided to pick up and leave and move to the East Coast, where I still have some extended family out here, so it was the easiest place for me to move and get into a big city.
Excellent. Megan, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Katz. I've been with the firm Weltman since May 2022, so probably about 9 months or so. I graduated from John Carroll and went to Cleveland State University for law school. I've been in Cleveland my entire life, so I was really happy to be able to continue my education here. Before working at Weltman, I had a lot of different experience working for different types of legal areas. I've clerked for 4 judges, worked for Office of General Counsel for Cleveland State, and somehow kind of found my way back to the foreclosure realm, which is where I work with Weltman now. I'm an associate attorney in the real estate default group, and I really love what I do here. In my free time, I like to spend time with my friends and family, and also I'm a big sports fan. Unfortunately, I didn't get to reel in the loss of a Browns Super Bowl loss because, you know, if you're from Cleveland, then you'll probably understand. But I do love my Cleveland sports and watch them whenever I can.
Excellent. So finally, before we jump into the discussion today, there are a few housekeeping items I have to cover. As a reminder, this is an interactive session, so please submit any questions you have throughout the presentation through the question button in the control panel. Also, this webinar is being recorded. At the conclusion of today's session, a link to the recording will be sent to all attendees. And lastly, there will be a short survey on your screen at the conclusion of the event. Please take the survey and share your feedback. We would greatly appreciate hearing your opinions. I also have to share our legal notice for webinars. This seminar presentation will provide information concerning potential legal issues, concepts, factual situations, and information. This seminar and the material provided is not a substitute for legal advice from qualified counsel on any matter, including similar or exact factual scenarios that may be provided or proposed. This presentation is not created or designed to address the unique facts or circumstances that may arise in any specific instance, and you should not and are not authorized to rely on this content as a source of legal advice. I advise you to seek competent legal advice on these topics. This seminar or seminar material do not create any attorney-client relationship between you or the law firm of Weltman, Weinberg Reis. Okay, how's that for legalese? So let's get into our presentation. I'm going to ask a number of questions, but again, we encourage any attendee to submit any question you may have. But I'm going to throw out some questions and ask our panelists in whatever order just to give us your response. So let's first start out with the dreaded bar exam. Any advice or tips to taking on the challenge of taking the bar exam?
I'll go first on this one. For me, the biggest thing is just a nice stringent schedule. I kind of ran it like a German train schedule. So I heard one of the 3Ls say my 1L year in law school. I would get up at 5 a.m., study from like 5 to 9, take the dogs for a walk, feed them, have lunch around 9:45. Then I would have my gym time. That was the one thing that could keep me sane during the studying for the bar. And that was still partial pandemic when I took the bar, so it was a lot of staying in a basement. But go to the gym, come home, and I would study another 4 or 5 hours. I ended up getting about 70% of my bar prep program done in the first 5 or 6 weeks. That way I was kind of able to coast and just focus up and sharpen on things towards the end. But I felt having a nice stringent schedule was very helpful.
Great.
I would definitely agree that keeping a schedule and figuring out a rhythm that works for you is definitely beneficial, because if you just go into it all day, every day, eat, live, breathe, bar exam, it can kind of drive you crazy a little bit. So incorporating things to kind of keep you a little bit grounded, balancing it with like different hobbies helps a lot. I actually also took the bar exam during the pandemic. It was the first round of pandemic bar exams, which was very chaotic, and it was very disorganized. It was pushed back a lot of times. And when I was taking my test, the fire alarms went off in my building when I was finishing the MBE portion, which was horrible. But I will say so I don't know if my experience is necessarily the same as current law students, but I will say when I was studying, I constantly was driven crazy by feeling like there's a certain way you have to study, and then a way that was conducive for me. And I would strongly encourage you to continue the efforts that you have in law school that help you study best, and continue those into your bar prep. Because if you're going to try to study in a way that just doesn't work for you, it's not going to resonate. And try to find creative ways that work for you and how you study is really the best way to kind of handle that. Don't listen to what other people are doing if it doesn't work for you. So.
No, I agree. And like you, Megan, I was also somebody who had to take it the first round after the pandemic had hit the US. So that meant my last semester of law school got turned into virtual law school for the final 6 weeks. My bar prep course that was supposed to be in person went virtual, and it also got delayed, I think 3 times in Pennsylvania, that the test got rescheduled until it ultimately took place remotely. So for me, my plan going into it was to just continue studying the same way I did in law school. I was doing good enough in law school to be able to graduate and be in the percent of people that my law school tends to have passed the bar exam. So I thought if it was good enough for law school, it'd be good enough for the bar exam. And then the pandemic happened and changed everything about how I do everything. So you just stick with your bar prep course to the best of your ability. And as AJ said, maintain a very strict schedule, keep in your routine, and don't become lackadaisical about it, because I mean, it's the bar exam. There's no magic way to get that thing taken care of. It's just a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of attention to detail. But you've already gotten through law school. Law school's not that easy either, so you'll be able to tackle the bar exam.
So 2 follow-up questions for AJ and Cameron. So Megan shared with us her funny, the alarms went off. Anything memorable or funny happened to you guys while taking the exam?
Yeah. Well, so I don't know if AJ's were virtual or not, but like Megan, I had to take mine in my bedroom. And I live in a row home in Philadelphia that is exposed to the street in a way where you can hear a leaf sliding across the sidewalk outside in my house. So cars driving by, people walking on the sidewalk going by, all of those noises terrified me because the rules for our exam were you have a camera on you at all times, you have an audio recording being made, and these sounds could flag your test and potentially disqualify your score. So I was terrified of that potentially happening, and I reached out to the bar examiners in advance of the test to ask them for any tips or anything I can do to avoid somebody blasting music out of their car windows driving by from causing an issue. And they said to stuff towels all throughout my windows in that room to try to block the sound. So for 2 days leading up to my exam, I was duct taping towels and stuffing towels in every nook and cranny in my room to try to make it as soundproof as possible. And my girlfriend was not happy at the lack of towels available in our.
How about you, AJ?
I don't have any great location-based stories. I was fortunate enough I took the bar remotely, but I was able to take it on campus. I had a classroom to myself. That was, I believe, the first administration of the entire full bar exam, a non-truncated version remotely. So that was pretty time-consuming, as anyone that's taken the bar exam knows. But I was sick going into it, and I had been sick for about a month and continued to be sick for another month. And I was just a coughing mess. And I was concerned that they were going to think I was like coughing and trying to look at something, or I would cough and it would pick up the sound one too many times, because there are all these horror stories about people's dogs barking and them failing the bar exam. So I was definitely nervous about just my own illness leading to a failure. But luckily enough, I think the bar kind of understands if you're. One of the things they have you do, and I don't know if anyone's taking it remotely anymore, but if they are, one thing that you have to do is kind of move your camera around and show your surroundings. So as long as you don't get up and they see that you're on screen the whole time, they kind of know that you're not doing anything. So I wouldn't get too riled up about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll share this with the group. When I took the bar exam over 32 years ago, we took it in downtown Columbus at the War Memorial Auditorium. It was a huge auditorium, and there were tables of 2 people, and you sat catty corner from the person, and there were it appeared to be hundreds of proctors in this auditorium, and that was your setting for 3 days in a row. So it was a bit intimidating, right? All those people in that large room, but we all got through it. So talk to me about when you found out you passed the bar. What did you do? Did you do something fun? How did you celebrate? Anything like that?
I think I cried. It was just a culmination of stress. And I remember when we were looking in Ohio for the results, a lot of my friends were texting me from law school because the site crashed because too many people were searching it. And I was worried at first because I saw my name on the list, but I had heard from other states that when they accidentally published the wrong list, people who didn't pass showed up as passing and vice versa. So I was like, oh my God, wait, did I actually not pass? But it's on my list. So for the first 10 minutes, I was in a bit of a panic, and then I kind of set in. So I wasn't really able to celebrate really, other than just order a ton of food and play some video games with my friends and celebrate. But it just kind of hits you, and it just all of the stress and all of the work that you put into it just kind of lets go at once, and it's a really amazing feeling. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead, AJ.
Go ahead, AJ.
Okay. Sorry about that. I saw my name, and then I went to check all my friends because, as Megan said, there was a little bit of hysteria, and there's no way all of my friends failed too. They're on law review. If we're all on the list, we're going to be okay. So then we all texted each other, congratulations, all those things. Luckily, nobody that I was close with failed. We were all fortunate in that regard. So after the initial text exchange, I was finally able to breathe a little bit. And as Megan said, it's like everything just lifts, and I felt lighter physically. Like I could sit up and I could breathe, and just the lack of stress for those few days was amazing before I had to go actually be an attorney. I was off work that day. I feel like most people probably take off work because you're either grieving or mourning or celebrating. So my fiance and I had gone to a brunch at Walter's in Columbus down in German Village. It was a nice little lunch. And then we went back home, got ready, and Ubered to Dave & Buster's because it was a place that we knew we'd be pretty dead during the day. Again, it was still kind of pandemic-y, so we wanted to make sure everything was safe. But we went to Dave & Buster's, had drinks, played games for hours, and Ubered back home at like midnight or something. But it was a fun little celebration just with the two of us because, again, it is an uplifting feeling when you get all that stress off your back.
No, it definitely is. I was working that day, and I mean, they release them on Fridays for a reason, I think. But my results were supposed to appear online at 4 p.m. on that Friday, and I was working. And similar to you, Megan, I didn't have or like ran into issues with their website in the past, and of course, on this occasion, everybody's checking at 4 o'clock, and nobody can access it, and so I didn't actually get to see the results until about 4:35 or so. So I remember all this time specifically because I gave it about 10 minutes, realized I wasn't getting anything, and started to just kind of go back to work and try to keep my mind occupied to avoid thinking about it. And I was on the phone with one of the attorneys at the firm I was at before, and she was dictating a motion to me to write up for her. And she was talking and talking and talking, and then I get a text on my phone from one of my friends from law school saying they can see them. And so she's talking, but I'm no longer typing for her. I'm looking at the website, and then I'm scrolling and I see my name, and then she just says to me, "Cameron, did you get all that?" And I say, I'm sorry, I haven't been paying attention for the last 30 seconds because I just passed the bar exam. I'm gonna have to go. And so I hung up on her, got out of the office, and then me and my girlfriend and my friends celebrated. Unfortunately, the city was still about 50% shut down, so I couldn't really go out and enjoy the town, but I was able to have a close group of friends to be with for that night.
Those are great stories. Thank you. So now you've become attorneys and you are now working in the creditors' rights space. Talk to us a little bit about why would a law student or incoming attorney choose to do creditors' rights? What are some of the positives and what are some of the benefits? Why don't we start with you, AJ?
Off the top of my head, one thing that I immediately think of is there are a lot of people that go into law for altruistic reasons. You want to help people, you want to make people's situations better, and in creditors' rights, especially in consumer, what I do, I really have the opportunity to do that. People look at collection agencies as the bad guys. We're out there trying to take people's money, but it's not to go off on a tangent on other companies, but the debt settlement companies are the ones that are charging people. They're getting worse deals than the people would have gotten working directly with me. And I have the opportunity to work within my settlement authority to make sure the clients are happy, but still be able to, cut people a break a little bit if they're in dire situations. We can work things out with the clients. And it just offers a little bit more, I guess, autonomy to make people's lives better when they're in rough situations. It's kind of like when people become a prosecutor as opposed to a public defender because they know that they can affect charges more as a prosecutor. So I always sort of liken those things. And then another quick thing that I think's really nice about this job is it's not, at least my end of it, isn't billable. And there's a little bit more scheduling autonomy as long as I can get in with my boss, let him know that this is getting done. I can come in this time. As long as I'm on top of things, it's not a matter of you're in the office right now. If something comes up, it's kind of understood that I can go take care of that as long as I'm getting my work done and I make it up, down the road or whatever. So I do like that there's a little bit of mobility to the schedule. It's not anything that's super set.
So Megan, you're in a different practice group. Talk to us about the positives and benefits you see.
Yes, so I deal with foreclosures and matters relating to property with my work. And one of the things I love about it is kind of AJ touched on it a little bit is there is a misconception about people thinking, oh, you're just trying to take people's houses, you're just trying to like collect your money, whatever. But really, one of the biggest benefits to me is being able to work with people. You know, I talk a lot with the borrowers quite often who call and are trying to work through, trying to resolve this default, and trying to come together with a resolution between the clients and the borrowers, and helping facilitate that, because really that's something that everybody wants ultimately in our line of work. And it really is rewarding to kind of help in that way, and help people who are in a really bad spot, you know, navigate through it and be kind of a facilitator with your clients with that. I also think just working in this area and in foreclosures in particular, we always talk about it, people in my department, you know, you kind of encounter something new every day. It's not just like you get into the grind and it's the same exact things every single day. There's like a unique problem. There's different areas of law that you have your hands on. So you're really keeping a lot of your skills that you've learned in law school sharp by practicing it in real time every day. And there's just weird situations that come up, and you know, people in my department who've been here for like 10 years are like, man, I don't know what to do with that. We've got to do some investigating. And it kind of creates a fun, interesting challenge in how you're practicing. And I really like that. And I think it keeps it, especially for a young attorney, it keeps it really interesting and really a good experience to start out.
Cameron, let me ask you a bit of I'll vary the question a bit. So during law school, while you were in law school, I'm assuming you didn't have your mind set on practicing creditors' rights. So how did you ultimately make that decision? And when was that during the law school process?
So it was actually after law school for me to do creditors' rights. So I was one of those young altruistic attorneys AJ's describing, who was very gung-ho and dead set on what my future was going to be, and that was consumer bankruptcy on the debtor side, pretty much the opposite of what I do today, and also the criminal defense work that I was doing at the other firm I was at. And I had known of Weltman, Weinberg Reis, and my supervising attorney here at in Philadelphia office because of the years of work I did as a consumer bankruptcy attorney. And I was actually just looking to make a change and applied to Weltman, having known, you know, your guys' history and existence and the volume of work that you have, but also because I was specifically looking for a role in civil litigation, and that's what this offered, because I'm in the motor vehicle subrogation department of our consumer collections group here. So it wasn't necessarily something I had sought out, but as both AJ and Megan have said, it is something I'm very glad I chose ultimately because of the exposure to the civil litigation and the learning I've been able to do over the last year or close to a year. So actually was never in my mind something that was a possibility, but it's, you know, as AJ was saying earlier, we're not the bad guys, as I used to think even just a year ago.
I guess if I were to respond to the same questions, you know, what I like about it is it's a fast-paced environment, as you guys know. If you're a results-oriented type person, you know, I think you might find this area of law very intriguing, because you can file a lawsuit today and within a couple of months, you may have your result. It may have resolved itself, or you've been to trial and hopefully have been successful. And I do like what you said, Megan. A lot of it is just feeling good about being an advisor, being a counselor to the person that you're pursuing. And hopefully you can get him or her to resolve the matter and put it behind them. So, okay, next question. Being a first-time lawyer, what advice and experiences can you share with clients, colleagues, and students studying to be an attorney? Why don't we start with you, Megan?
Well, like I mentioned before, like my experience starting out as an attorney was kind of had an overcast of the pandemic shown upon it. So for me, I had worked in foreclosures before graduating law school, and because of the moratorium, it was, you know, not an option anymore because my old company was furloughing a lot of its employees. So really, one of the biggest advice I can give is to learn how to pivot, learn how to adapt, you know, life and the trajectory that you might have thought that you were going to go on, especially being a young attorney. It might not always be the opportunity that you have at that moment when you're starting out. So trying to figure out ways to get good experiences, develop your repertoire of experience and people that you know and that can kind of help you get to where you need to go, and really just have an open mind to the opportunities that might be available to you. Also just talk to anybody that you know for advice. Like I've had people that I used to work for in internships and externships that were like, hey, yeah, let's keep in touch, when your externship is done. And, you always think to yourself like, oh yeah, they're just saying that. But really, like, they mean that if they're saying that to you, and if you're trying to figure out what to do, picking the brains of people that you worked with before and who are very experienced in that, know you, and might be able to give you some good insight and advice and potentially connections to a potential job opportunity. Using every resource that you have is really something that's really important, especially early on in your career, trying to figure out what the next steps are.
Cameron, any comments there?
Sure. One piece of advice I wish I would have had drilled into my head a little more when I was first starting out is to really be confident in yourself and the knowledge that you have. I mean, you just spent years studying law at law school, and I'm sure everybody would agree that what you learn in law school is not directly applicable to practice in some ways, but it still provides you with a really good base of knowledge to navigate the litigation process and to enter into a negotiation with opposing counsel. Now, with that said, you got to do the preparation and do the work to back up whatever it is your argument is. But really make sure you enter every conversation or enter every argument you have in court with confidence, because that really goes a long way. And I've had cases where maybe the facts or the law is not necessarily the strongest in terms of my position, but having the confidence that you can still win despite that can usually result in a good outcome at the end of the day.
AJ, did you clerk either for another firm or for Weltman before becoming an attorney?
I did, yes.
So we have a question from the audience. They're asking, curious as to how that transition from law clerk to associate, what was that like?
For me, the transition wasn't that different from law clerk to associate, largely because I had initially clerked for a criminal defense attorney, and one of his ex-employees had scooped me up to his firm to come be a practice pending clerk. So they knew that I was taking the bar. They figured I'd pass. They hired me on to clerk for them and learn the ropes going into being an attorney. So I was able to learn their practices, largely learn what it takes to be an attorney for that firm. And then when I passed the bar, I came in and was an attorney. So the transition wasn't that great. I just kind of took on my own cases instead of working everyone else's. The big transition was going from domestic law, criminal defense, and juvenile law to creditors' rights. That was a very different change of pace, largely because people aren't as angry with you. When you're taking people's children or trying to keep them out of jail, they're just mad all the time. I did a lot of guardian ad litem work and people were angry. But over here, it's a lot more, I guess it feels a lot more formal because you're largely just handling, or at least my end is largely just handling finances. And if you don't mind, Chuck, I would like to briefly touch on something from the last question real quick
Sure.
that I had neglected to say. One of the things about creditors' rights, and I noticed during the transition that I do like, is the variety. When a lot of people hear about the job and you think I'm going to go work at a collections firm, they think you're just pushing a lot of papers. You're pretty much exclusively signing documents or making phone calls. But as I had mentioned to you before the webinar today, I was in court this morning. I came back, I had a telephone mediation. I've been sending emails and phone calls to attorneys all day. You get to do a lot. You're not just kind of pigeonholed into one thing. And creditors' rights as a field itself has a lot to do. I mean, all three of us are in largely different practices. So I do like the sheer variety that we get. And that was something I noticed, to tie back into the other question, during the transition from not necessarily clerk to attorney, but from practice to practice, was that there is a lot in creditors' rights that you just don't really realize until you're in it.
Very good point. Megan, let's start with you on this next question. How has working at Weltman helped you in your career journey?
Oh, it's been great. It's been, this is the first real like a official practicing attorney job I had before this. I worked as an advisor to a juvenile court judge. So it's really my first time getting into the experience of practicing law. And everybody here has been nothing but helpful and willing to answer questions and things, and having a firm that has so many knowledgeable people around. You know, like yesterday I had a question on one of my cases. There's a bankruptcy issue, and I'm not very well versed in bankruptcy because we try to stay more towards the foreclosure end of things. And so I just sent an email to someone from the bankruptcy department, and they called me up and talked me through everything. And being able to be surrounded by people who are subject matter experts in so many different things, because like AJ just said, there's a lot of variety of different types of things that you encounter and things that you do in this day-to-day job. So having the attorneys that are so knowledgeable and so helpful and welcoming in this firm and just across the board has just been really great to learn and to have your first experience as an attorney. I remember when I interviewed here, my boss was like, everything can be a teachable moment. And to be a young attorney looking to get that experience and that knowledge, that's like music to my ears. And that's been very helpful and very conducive to my learning and to becoming better and growing and you know, practicing.
AJ, how has it helped you in your career journey?
Very much similar to Megan. It's been extremely helpful coming from a smaller firm to a much larger firm. I mean, we had 4 attorneys total and 3 were partners at my other firm. So I was the only associate. The average age of the partners was 34. So one had a lot of practice in what they were doing. The other ones weren't that seasoned themselves. So to go from that to a place like Weltman, where we have attorneys that have been doing this for, you know, I would say average across the partners is probably about 30 years. Everyone's very experienced, everyone's very knowledgeable, and as Megan said, everyone's super helpful. The firm, not just the attorneys, but we can go to legal assistants, if there are paralegals around, anybody that we can speak to is going to do their best to help us. And it really makes it easier to transition into an attorney role when you don't have any creditors' rights experience. So Weltman's been very helpful in that regard, and just kind of learning how to navigate a bigger firm. It's been helpful in working the software management, the firm management software, sorry, because I came from obviously a very different background, and working this practice software management, which is twofold, both practice software and collections, being able to learn how to use that just further helps understanding other things that I'll be doing throughout my career. And helping familiarize yourself with the docket is another thing that I kind of knew coming in, but the attorney that I trained under really hammered home was that you should always stay on top of your docket, especially on your contested cases, to make sure that there isn't anything that's being missed in the mail, that you understand what's happening with the case. So not just what you have in office, but the online tools that the courts provide are very helpful.
Cameron, working for a smaller office, how would your response differ? Does it differ much?
Not so much. So our, when you say smaller office, you mean here in Philadelphia?
Yes.
Weltman? So it wouldn't differ all that much because luckily I do still have access to those same resources that both AJ and Megan rely on, and the same software that helps manage my caseload. I do appreciate being in a bit of a smaller office just for my own, personal preference. I like to see the same, 2 or 3 attorneys that I work with day in and day out, and it's nice to have kind of that smaller group so we grow as a team a little better. But at the same time, I am, I do a little bit of bankruptcy work for Weltman as well. I'm the only person here in Philadelphia that's doing that work, and so I'm developing a pretty good relationship with Scott Fink and others in the bankruptcy department who are all out in Ohio and very far from me. But that is the thing that I really enjoy working at Weltman is the people and their experience are a great resource to help me in my own personal career advance. And the volume of cases that we have here, even here in Philadelphia, it, as everybody's kind of touched on before, it exposes you to so many different new scenarios or scenarios that you have not come across before that just in general, I see myself becoming a much more well-rounded attorney and litigator because of the type of work we do here and the people that I get to work with.
You know, you all hit upon it, which was a great point, and that is whether or not, whether you're working for Weltman or outside Weltman, as a young new attorney, ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Absorb as much as you can from those that have more experience than you, and take notes, right? Take mental notes, take physical notes. Start making files so that if you come across the same issue or question in the future, you're probably able to answer it yourself because you've been through it once before. So those are all good responses. Let's start with AJ. How did you manage work-life balance when you decided to go to law school and while you were in school?
Thank you, Chuck. A big part of what was beneficial, and this might seem weird, is that at the time I was single, or at least through the first 2 years of law school, and that meant I had all the time in the world. As long as I slept and got my work done, I could make it happen. So I would get up, I would maybe study for a little bit before class. The way Capital structured their 1L a year was very spacious. We'd have 5 classes, I believe it was 5, and they were 9.5, 10-hour days, but we had a couple 2-3 hour gaps. I would go up to the library, eat there, study between those, make sure I'm prepped for the next classes. And then later on in the day when I would go home, I would immediately study some more, unless I worked. I did have a job right from the get-go, but I only worked like 12 hours. So as long as I wasn't working, I was studying, and then at night I would make sure I had a little bit of gym time. I'd still go, maybe 4 days out of the 7 a week. I'd make sure to get time in on weekends, and flashcards were very helpful. We had a mandatory flashcard system. So it was kind of just like with the bar, especially that first semester, it was just making sure I stayed on schedule and I held myself accountable. And I know Megan had mentioned playing video games as a celebration. That was one thing I really had to make sure to mitigate. I've always been a gamer and I had to keep that away. So it's largely managing your schedule, managing vices, I would say. Keep the vices at a minimum. Keep yourself mentally healthy. If that means going to the gym or drinking a latte or whatever you need to do, just make sure you're mentally doing okay and you're keeping the vices at a distance.
Cameron, how did you deal with the work-life balance?
Well, I didn't do a great job balancing it and pretty much struck the life part out of that equation, I would say. So I was working full time, and when I began law school, I was working full time and actually got into a part-time evening division at the Temple University Law School in Philadelphia. So the good part about that is while I kept doing the 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and then added it on average about 3 hours a night from Monday through Thursday night was my law school schedule. It was unfortunate because it meant a lot of personal sacrifices with my friends and family and just things that you're simply not able to do anymore. But I was doing that process with 40 other people who were in the exact same situation as I was. So it was a good opportunity for me to make really good friends out of the misery we were all experiencing together. And we got into a routine. I mean, like anything else, it becomes a routine in terms of you wake up, you work, you have an hour break to commute to law school, you do your law school, and then you're up for a couple hours studying for the next day. And all of us got into that routine. And then Thursday was our Friday, so we luckily could all decompress by going to have a couple drinks at the bar on campus and get ready to do it all over again next week. So
yeah. Megan, any other comments about work-life balance?
So it's funny, when I went to Cleveland Marshall for like an orientation program, they had like friends and family. So my parents, my brother, and my boyfriend, they kind of separated us, and they had all the family in the auditorium, and they basically gave this presentation like, you're never going to see your law student again. Make sure they like take time to eat. They're not going to want to do anything, but just make sure that they like do the basics. And my parents were like, what the, like, that's so extreme. And I think a lot of the times law school, when you're starting, really tries to scare you a little bit. And it's supposed to prepare you for the intensity of the workload, which is very valid, but it doesn't always have to be like that. And I know I always didn't do the best job balancing it. But to what Cameron and AJ just said, finding that work-life balance is crucial for me. In the second and third year, I worked full-time and was a full-time student. So during the week, I basically was like, that's all I did. I did like 80 hours basically between work, school, and classes. But on the weekends, like Friday night, Saturday, and then Sunday during the day, I didn't touch anything. That was the time I spent with my boyfriend, with my parents, with my friends. You know, if I happened to have a day during the week where it was a light workload, maybe I'd see somebody, but just kind of keeping strict boundaries. And maybe that's a little bit too lopsided. Maybe you want to have some more balance during the week, but it's what worked for me. But trying to figure out a routine that works conducive to what you have to do, and also not let the whole voice of like, you have to dedicate your life and your soul to the law school and not do anything else. You know, it can work. You just got to find a good balance that works for you and take that time to balance everything. Don't just, you know, stick your head in your books and not do anything else.
Yeah. The important thing here is take some me time, right? Whether that's working out, just reading a book, going out with friends, whatever that me time is, schedule that either every day or, to your point, Megan, on the weekends, but get some time away from studying, the books, and work. It's important. Let's talk about practicing law in the 21st century. Do you think there's more challenges and difficulties practicing law today than maybe 5 years ago? Megan, why don't we start with you?
Oh, there's definitely more. I mean, as the world gets more complicated, the cases that we have to deal with definitely get more complicated. I know for me during the pandemic, it was a pretty big example of this in foreclosures. Like I said, I had left working in foreclosure law for a time and then came back. And in that time that I was gone, there were a lot of different laws and regulations that were made to change how we handle foreclosures. You know, and just based on the pandemic and based on this big global crisis, which a lot of the times complicated things of how this area of law was practiced. And even just, you know, like AJ mentioned, he went to a court hearing and then he did a mediation on the phone. The way that we're practicing law has changed a lot too, like doing things over the phone more so than we did before. Having hearings that are telephonic when in the past it would just be accustomed to go to the courthouse for this 5-minute hearing. So I think just the subject matter of what we're doing, but also how we're doing it looks drastically different. More attorneys are looking more towards technology and kind of embracing that a little bit more in how they practice rather than maybe what they did before the pandemic. It's all just completely changing with everything that happens in society, and it's very interesting, but it can also make our lives maybe a little bit more complicated with how we do our jobs.
Cameron, are you finding in your area of the country, are more and more judges bringing attorneys back into court, or are they still doing Zoom calls, Zoom hearings? How does that work?
Both in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, the two states I practice in, there's been a big push to move everything back to in-person appearances. New Jersey remained remote up until just about a month and a half or 2 months ago, and now a lot of the counties are beginning to go back to in-person appearances. So that's good and bad in ways, as Megan mentioned, because, you know, with a remote appearance, no vacation is truly a vacation, because rather than continue 2 hearings, I can just take care of those before going out to do whatever I want to do on vacation. But now, going back to in person, I do kind of like having a true vacation again, not having to worry about any potential court appearances or anything else like that. Now, with that all being said, there's still pandemic-related issues. So, for example, in New Jersey, they are beginning to suspend all jury trials in a lot of counties because of lack of judges, because of the Great Resignation is affecting all facets of the workforce. And apparently there is a shortage of judges now in the state of New Jersey, and the pandemic continues to just change how practice is done.
AJ, what are your thoughts? How is it practicing now versus, you know, again, not that you were practicing 5-10 years ago, but how do you think things have changed based on what you've heard?
Yes, I would agree with Megan in that the more complicated and the more evolved the world's getting, the more complicated and involved some of the cases are getting. It's no longer what's the definition of a chicken or who caught the fox. It's a lot more complex issues. And as far as the practice itself goes, technology's obviously made things more streamlined, especially post-pandemic. We've had a lot of judges that are still, I think, may permanently keep telephonic pretrials and things like that, and just make final pretrials, trials, all those things in person. There are a lot of things that are staying lenient in that regard. There are a lot more courts that are accepting motions for telephonic things instead of just forcing you to be in or making it automatically telephonic. They're kind of leaving the door open for choice. But I believe with that streamline and with all these different options, there's a lot more variability than there used to be. It's no longer just show up to court at this time, the case is going to happen. Everything's on a nice schedule. You see the same attorneys over and over again because you're all there for the same things. It's kind of scattered and all over the place. So I've had a lot of situations where I end up in court, opposing counsel didn't file a motion to appear via telephone, and they still end up appearing via telephone because they had their wires crossed. Or I file a motion and they think it counts for both of us, so I appear by telephone and then the court's angry with them. There's a lot of situations like that where things are just kind of in limbo and getting lost in translation and wires are getting crossed. So I do think that we have it a little bit easier in the sense that we have a lot more options and a lot more ways to handle things, but that also is kind of a double-edged sword because we have a lot more ways to mess up.
You know, it's interesting, our industry has always been regulated, but even more so today, very highly regulated. And that's why I think it's important that all of us stay in tune with recent case law, with what's happening in the states that we practice in, what's happening at the Attorney General level, in the state courts. As you guys all know, we do testing here at the firm on a regular basis so that we stay in compliance with all different regulations that are governing our industry. So I would say in the past 5 to 10 years, that's what's really changed for me, is just the increased regulation facing our industry. How has working at Weltman compared to other jobs you've had, whether that be in the legal industry or outside the legal industry? Any differences you want to talk about?
I think Weltman's been a lot more structured than a lot of the other positions I've had. I mean, throughout my life, I've worked everywhere from manual labor jobs to McDonald's to retail, and obviously the different clerkships and prior attorney position. And most things haven't had the structures in place and the time-tested processes that Weltman has, because the firm has been around since 1930. The firm's had plenty of time to practice things, to get things wrong and fix them. And I feel like everything's pretty smooth now. Everything's in a good position to help attorneys get through the large caseload that we do have. And I would say the biggest difference between Weltman and other jobs is just Weltman is a well-oiled machine and a lot of the others haven't been.
Megan, how would you respond?
I would agree that there is a lot more structure, and I found that in the other positions that I've worked, I like that structure, especially for starting out. Very briefly, I worked at a very small firm with 2 other attorneys, one of which I had only seen in the office like once or twice. And it was kind of a chaotic environment, especially when you're starting out, and you're kind of expected to do everything, which can be a great learning experience. But if it's not the way that you learn when you're starting out, or the way that you want to kind of get a handle on the situation, it can be very overwhelming, which is very much how I felt. So with Weltman, there's a lot more of a structure. There's a lot more of like there's departments, there's a process to how things are handled. And to AJ's point, it's for a very long time, this is how it's worked. And there's been a lot of trial and error, it seems, to make it work as efficiently and as well as possible for everyone that's involved. And that is something that I really appreciate. It's been great for me to be able to be in this job and practice and grow into an attorney that I want to be. Whereas with other places that I've worked before, it's a little bit more of a crapshoot with how it's going to be one day versus the next, and that uncertainty can be very difficult when you're starting out. So,
Cameron, how would you respond?
Well, it sounds like Megan and I might have worked at the same law firm prior to joining Weltman. So I agree with everything you said. I was at a smaller boutique firm, and at that point, I was one of 4 attorneys there. And it's like you guys have said, Weltman provides a tried and true method and infrastructure that, as a younger attorney, makes me a lot more confident in the work that I'm putting out there and producing, and also saves a tremendous amount of time. I mean, there's no need to recreate the wheel when there have been attorneys at this firm for now many decades who have already made and refined that wheel to be nearly perfect. And so that cuts a lot of wasted and unnecessary time out of my day and allows me to focus on the things that I think I should be focusing on as a new attorney in terms of substantive law issues that I need to research and better understand at this time in my career, and just learning more about the litigation process as cases go through their stages. That is something that I get a lot more here at this firm at Weltman than I do at my prior job, where I had full control of a case from beginning to end, but at the same time felt like a newborn baby, and maybe wasn't able to teach myself every tiny little detail at that point in time. So
Excellent. We have time for one more question. We've talked about the resources within the firm, like other attorneys, maybe the more experienced attorneys that you can turn to for advice. But what other resources do you find most useful in your career? AJ, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. As I had touched on before, I think dockets are super helpful, and we talked about practice management software. But one thing that I think gets neglected a little bit with younger attorneys, especially because we're still trying to feel things out, is utilizing the court resources, going in, making sure you know court staff, especially in the county you're in most. So like up in Cuyahoga County or here in Franklin, you're in these huge courts with hundreds of staff. But if you get to know the way the judges' bailiffs work and you get to know the bailiffs on a first name basis, you can streamline everything so much better. And even if you don't get that in depth, just understanding the court's system. So you meet these people, you use them as resources, they help you, but understanding the way the courts work and the way they're kind of structured and their processes, you can really get through things a lot smoother. Like going in today, I didn't just sit around and wait for someone to come. I knew that the bailiff would be in the back. I could just go grab her because her name's Val. I've known her since I clerked. Real nice lady. Go in, let Val know I'm here. She can call up opposing counsel to see if he's even going to show because he hasn't in the past. And it's just understanding these little things help you get through everything so much easier, and it makes the experiences a lot more pleasant. And if you do have a good rapport with court staff and they know that you're basically good for your word, if they know that you've always followed up on things, you've done things by the book, and you're personable, they're willing to do things, maybe give you that extra pre-trial date you might not otherwise get, things like that. So I would say court staff's a huge resource outside of the office.
AJ, you make an excellent point. I remember as a young attorney, I would try and attend or appear at the hearing 15 minutes, 20 minutes early, and have some time to chat with the bailiff, have some time to chat with the judge's law clerk if he or she is available. But more importantly, go down to the clerk's office, where you file the pleadings, where you file the paperwork. Introduce yourself. Maybe share with them that you are a newer attorney and you were just looking for advice, or anything I can take back to our firm so that we can do better. And just get to know those people because they can be your greatest friends. Cameron, how would you respond? What other resources do you find useful?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with getting to know the court staff and utilizing them. Other than that, one big one that I'm using a lot nowadays is, and you can find it on Westlaw or in Pennsylvania, every county has their own website where there's published local rules of, civil procedure or criminal procedure, if that's what your practice area is. But I have made it a habit of anytime I'm filing a complaint in a county that I'm not super familiar with here in whether it's Pennsylvania or New Jersey, I go find those local rules and try to prepare in advance for whatever strange little things that county is going to have me do. I can't speak on every state, but in Pennsylvania, as an example, we have a statewide rule of civil procedure, like just about every state, I'd imagine. But each county has their own version of those rules and has a lot of flexibility in what they can customize. And not every motion is filed the same way from county to county, and it's not presented the same way, and arbitrations don't occur the same way from county to county. So that is something I learned very quickly here, that the memo that is optional in county A is not optional and it is in fact mandatory in county B, and you learn very quickly that you need to learn and become familiar with those rules. But even, you know, at the very least, just make sure you know how to find them and give them a quick review anytime you have a case coming up in that county, just so you don't look like you're brand new and have no idea what you're doing when you have to go in front of a judge.
Good point. Megan, any final comments on outside resources?
Well, I would definitely agree. Court, like knowing the court and the staff is a huge one. Like I said, I worked as an advisor for Judge Corrigan at the juvenile court for about a year before I worked here. And I know, being, you know, like on the other end of it, knowing the attorneys that would always make a point to give us a service copy of something, follow up. They had my email. They were always in communication with our staff with what was going on. That makes a huge difference on our end, the court's end, to, you know, maybe give more grace or deference if there's like a conflict for a hearing or something, or being able to kind of assist because there's a line of communication and that familiarity with people. So making those little efforts to make good connections with the court staff and the people in the clerk's office, it goes a long way, and it really helps make things a little bit easier when things might go wrong with filing a case or getting a case moving. I would also agree with the local rules. A lot of the more obscure counties in Ohio have very strange, or not strange, but very niche local rules that, you know, you might not have even thought of unless if you had looked it up. And so being able to be familiar with those and make a point of checking the websites and making sure that everything is in line is definitely something that's beneficial. I think beyond that, just I would say those are two really good ones. Those were the two that I had. So I think we're all on the same page.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, that brings us to the conclusion of our webinar. I want to thank our panelists for your great insight today. I want to thank those who attended our webinar. I hope you found today's presentation informative. As a reminder, a short survey is going to pop up on your screen when the webinar ends. Please share your feedback with us. Let us know what future topics you might like to see and discuss. Thank you again for attending. Have a great day.